Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I've just got something. I don't have any notes. I've just got a thought. Just one thing to say about the washing of clothes during the 9 days. That I've got something that a practical issue. The bus is coming in like 7 minutes, and I'm gonna put myself on mute when I'm on the bus. Okay.
Okay.
Can I start?
Sure.
Okay. So, as mentioned previously, you're not allowed to wear or even wash clothing. But if you don't have anything and you need to wash it, or you have something in your cupboard that was washed before the 9 days and you want to wear it, the practical solution is as follows. You put it on the floor and you stand on it, because that makes it unfresh. I don't know if you've heard about that, Damon. That's what you do. You actually stand on it. Don't wear it yet. Just put it on the floor, stand on it on both sides with both feet. And that's Alan Zolberg taught us this years ago. That's how you actually make it unfresh. So if you need something, that's how you do it. Because you're not putting, it's before you actually wear it. So
Okay, I have one
I
tip
don't know
on
if you
that.
guys have.
Take your
Yeah.
shoes off.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I don't know, I think I just thought of that because I didn't don't have any notes with me and that. So, I'm just walking to the bus stop here. So I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, not much. That's what I wanted to say. So, which is very practical. And especially, if you really want to wear a certain t-shirt or pants, that's what you must do.
I'm going to ask you a lucky question, Kevin. Are you allowed to wear a Ramones t-shirt during the 9 days because you can't listen and appreciate music?
What about your ringtone? I've got my own custom-made ringtones, my own music, which I converted to MP3 format. Am I allowed to use those ringtones?
But I think anything that wakes you up doesn't create joy.
Yeah.
Hey,
And
Damon?
I mean, yeah, that's the story, man.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Listen, are you able to click on another link on the bus? Because I just want to share an idea.
Of course, but I'm gonna be. No, the bus is only coming in. Let's just have a look. Can you hear me walking? Can you hear the?
Yeah, we can.
carry-on?
I'm getting seasick just looking at you. I'm just getting
Hold
giddy
on a
because I'm
sec.
seeing this motion.
Hold on a sec.
You know.
Okay, well, it's probably coming about 5 minutes. So
Okay, so I just
I'm
want to
out of
see.
breath just from watching this.
now I'm at the bus stop here. Arthur, you know where this is?
No, I don't know where it is. Okay. She's spinning around. Oh, that's fine.
Spinning around too quickly, Kev. No one can see.
And now
Go a bit faster, Kevin.
Can you see the Hebrew writing there? Azrieli Ranana.
Yeah,
Kevin, can you see it? Super from Arthur, don't tell them. Please stop it. I want them to work out the Hebrew words.
If we could see it, we'd try, but we actually can't see it.
Dave?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? I actually get a thing called Ask the Raw. I don't know if you guys have heard about it.
No, tell me.
Okay, so it's something I get on a daily basis. It says, "Hi, Raw. What should I do to avoid wearing freshly laundered clothes during the 9 days? Since the prohibition against wearing laundered clothes lasts several days, there is a custom to prepare sufficient amount of used clothing for this period. But by wearing one's clothes for a short time before Rosh Chodesh, this can be done today or tomorrow, okay? One who fails to do this may take a laundered garment, throw it on the floor, and even step on it. By doing so, it is no longer considered clean and may be worn. During the 9-day period, one may wear clean underwear and socks and change dirty hand towels. Since people are accustomed nowadays to changing the articles frequently, changing them does not entail any aspect of pleasure, rather it is simply a removal of something repulsive. Okay. If someone fills a shirt with a stain that makes him look unpresentable, and he has no other t-shirt, other shirt to wear, he may clean it with water out of the concern of human dignity. And if the stain does not come out with water alone, he may avail himself of soap.
Thank you. And I think if there's going to be permanent damage to clothing and you have to use preen or one or two things and get the stain out, I think I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't be expected to sustain a financial loss. You just couldn't wear that shirt within those 9 days. But I think there's certain things that you have to adhere to the stain immediately. Arthur, thank you for that clarity. Kevin, thank you too. I just want to go through one or two ideas with you that I learned by Rabbi Goldschmidt in terms of the temple. And he was saying something interesting. He was saying that at the end of the day, one of the biggest losses, Arthur, you don't seem like you're listening.
I'm just putting on my glasses.
Okay, are you with us?
Yeah, one of the biggest losses, yeah.
Yeah, I know you're not listening when you say that. You do that with your wife. You just repeat the last sentence.
You're talking about Rabbi Goldschmidt, one of the biggest losses, yes, and that's
Okay. So what I'm saying is, he was saying that one of the biggest losses is you don't know what the loss is. So he was describing that why did people? One of the guys from the show went to the Krieger Park this week, and people come from all around the world spending tens of thousands of dollars going to the Kruger Park. And your average question is, well, why don't you just go and visit your local zoo? You can see the full plethora of animals there, and you save yourself tens of thousands of dollars. And anybody that's asked the question with a little bit of thought knows that they want to see the animal in the natural habitat, because you're not experiencing the animal in its natural reactive mode nor its habitual behavior when it's in a constricted space and an artificial space, not in the way that its instincts would be prevalent. So at the end of the day, he was saying that Jews are very much like at the time of the temple, specifically was talking about the first Beis HaMikdash, because then there was still prophecy. By the time the second Beis HaMikdash came, the rabbis removed both prophecy and the need for avodah zorah. I'll explain that now. But he was saying specifically in the first temple, what would happen is that it's the equivalent to a lion that was in the wild, and before it had been taken in captivity, it had a sense of years of experience out of captivity. And then obviously when it's captured and forced to live into certain enclosures like a zoo, etc., its cubs won't know any different. So its cubs will think that in fact is the normative environment that it should be raised in, and its behavior will be curtailed according to the artificial environment created for it. So he said, so too, it's the same thing that people pay tens of thousands of dollars to go to the Kruger because they want to experience the animal in its natural habitat without any of the social constraints that have affected the animal's behavior. So too, a Jew doesn't know what it's like to be at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, because we almost generations of being like confined animals, in the sense that we're not going to achieve our true nature, and we don't even know what that true nature is. So he was using that as an analogy, which was pretty apt. And obviously, as we know, that avodah zorah was removed from the world, but the corollary of that is that there has to be a balance, that prophecy had to leave the world, because we were operating almost at a frequency level where, in order to experience prophecy, you had that drive for spirituality, and on its converse negative side, it would drive somebody towards committing idol worship, avodah zorah, because it was a way to connect the spiritual. So it almost can be seen as a sexual drive, that somebody prepubescently is not going to have that same sort of sexual drive, or in somebody in their 70s will not have the same sexual drive as a 20-year-old, because that part has been removed from that person. So too, avodah zorah was getting so out of control that the sacrifice they had to make was removing prophecy. You can't have it both ways. So almost there was a spiritual capping of the soul's potential in order that we don't go in the danger zone. It's equivalent of going like 200 k's an hour. You can't afford to make mistakes at that speed, because you'll write yourself off. So what happened is the engine capacity was reduced in order that there wouldn't be fatalities. But in terms of having Grand Prix racing, you wouldn't ever get to that level of performance. That's the reality. So he was talking about there was what can it be compared to? It's like one case. There was towards the Second Temple era, there were 10 things missing from the Second Temple that the First Temple had. But in essence, during the Greek Empire, not the Roman Empire, they sent in, none of the non-Jews wanted to get into the temple and retrieve the menorah because they were terrified that they'd lose their life. So one Jew volunteered for a certain amount of money. They said you can keep in the base of Mikdash whatever you find, as long as you bring out some of the other stuff. Anyway, he brought out the menorah, which he wanted to keep himself. And they said, not only can you not keep it yourselves, but we can't keep it because this is of such magnificence. It belongs to the emperor in the Greek Empire. So what happened was they said, well, go and take it back. And in the meantime, get other things for yourself and for us in terms of booty from the temple. Anyway, he refused. And this was a Jew on a very, very low level that even non-Jews were too scared to go in the Beis HaMikdash. And he did in order to retrieve gold for a price. But he refused. And they first said to him, well, you can have more than you take. You'll be very wealthy. And eventually he wouldn't budge. And they tortured him to get him to concede. And no matter how much they tortured him, eventually they killed him until his body couldn't sustain it anymore. So Rabbi Goldschmidt's saying that here's a person that enters the temple for a very bad reason, for very greedy and corrupt motives. And after a short period of time, just by touching the menorah, it put him on a level that he was prepared to be a Kiddush Hashem. And it said in the commentaries that when his soul left the body, he was told from a voice in Shemaim that he'd go directly to Gan Eden without having to go to Gehinnom for his sin. And he would almost get there without any sort of purgatory whatsoever. So if you could take a bad Jew with bad purposes and let them be exposed to what it was like of the holiness in the temple, and this could fundamentally change who they were in an instant. The Vilna Gaon was saying at the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, your average farmer was on such a spiritual level that his whole generation couldn't compete. One of the things is before there was the first luchos, before the first tablets, whatever you learned, you wouldn't lose it in terms of memory. And that even sustained up until the time that they put the Mishnah and the Gemara into writing, because that memory of being hold all that information with the oral Torah, which was given just father to son and rabbi to student, dissipated. That's why they had to put it in writing. It wasn't that they would worry that the chain of command would be broken. It's that we had the frequency or the capacity to retain that information. And he was just saying our biggest loss is we don't know what the loss is. That's it. All right, I'm going to send a new link. Guys, any comments?
It's quite true what you said there, Dan. You know, we actually don't know what we're losing.
Yeah. We had
until
exactly.
The problem is we haven't experienced it to lose it. That's the thing.
That's exactly why he used that line captivity and why people go across the world, because they do get a sense that the animal in its natural habitat behaves completely different to a constructed environment. And the cubs born out of an animal in captivity think that that's the reality. They don't know what the reality of untapped potential actualized could actually mean, and freedom means. We have no idea. We children of... Right, guys, let's get started quickly. So we on the 81st daf. So we're now expanding upon Joshua's 10 regulations in order to merit living into Israel. And those were conditions in order that we sustain meriting living in Eretz Israel. So what did we learn? People shall pass to the animals in privately owned forests, and the owner shall not object. Now, Gavin, if you remember, asked a good question because we didn't understand. We learned the previous stuff. No, you can't use domesticated animals, small ones, or undomesticated animals in your fellow Jews' field. And this was a special enactment by Joshua with regards to encouraging people to live in Eretz Israel. Okay? So now we're seeming to learn that you can. So the answer is no. If you look at the Aramaic, it's using a specific word here. It's talking about privately owned forests, which means there's no such thing in this technical way of privately owned forests. By its very nature, a forest is public, even if it might be privately owned. And I think you can think of it in terms of mineral rights. If you buy property and they find minerals under your house, Anglo-American and all these sort of companies have got, the South African government has got mineral right jurisdiction over your privately owned property. So there's certain inalienable rights that the government has. So what we're saying here is, as far as forests are concerned, even if they're privately owned, another Jew is entitled to bring their small animals to consume them. This does not apply to cultivated lands, because cultivated lands are crops for food, essential food. They're not grasses where an animal can consume. It's not going to affect the sustainability of human life. So Rav Papa had to qualify this enactment, and he said, we have not stated this ruling, except with regard to small domesticated animals, sheep and goats, pasturing in an exceedingly large and dense forest. And the whole reason he said that is because in which case the forest won't be decimated. That's the way Rashi explains it. And the Meiri says that the damage will not be so discernible. They're saying the same thing. So, however, with regard to small domesticated animals pasturing in a small forest, that's not allowed because you're going to notice the significant damage. Same thing with large domesticated animals pasturing in a large and dense forest. So we have not stated it there. So since the damage to the forest in either case is too great, and all the more so in the case of large domesticated animals pasturing in a small forest, that we do not allow. So only in that ruling of an extremely large privately owned forest for small animals kept under a certain jurisdictional and consumption limitation. So what's the second enactment? And they may gather wood from their fellows' fields. Now Gavin was quite right to have a problem with this, but we shall see the constraints therein. Okay, so the Gemara again qualifies this enactment as well. It said, we have not stated this ruling except with regard to such insignificant growths as prickly shrubs, cacti and the like, and thorny trees. However, with regard to other more valuable trees and bushes, especially fruit trees, guys, we have not stated it. One may not collect wood from them. And even in the case of prickly shrubs, cactuses, and thorn trees, we have not stated that gathering wood is permitted except with regards to growths that are still attached to the ground. Because the Shita Mukubetzes adds that in that case, the owners like that those worthless plants are removed because they draw their nourishment from his land and thereby deplete the soil quality of nitrogen, etc. And the public's pruning of those useless plants means that the actual vegetation that is useful are not going to lose their nutrition to cacti, etc. However, with regard to branches that have been detached, we have not stated it. So what do we mean we have not stated it? Is that since the owner of the field took the trouble to cut off branches from his prickly shrubs, we presume that it never just neatly came off the tree by itself. It's obvious, guys. You've got to think that if it looks like it's been cut off, it's for a purpose. And then we presume to mean that he uses them for firewood or for actual wood itself and to create things. So the minute you see something that looks like it's not random, it probably isn't random. So then you can't collect wood because they were attached for a specific purpose. And even in the case of growths that are still attached to the ground, we have not stated that gathering wood is permitted except with regard to moist wood. Because with dry wood, it's obvious that it could be used for firewood, and therefore you can't take that away from the owner, whereas moist wood is not in a state to be consumed immediately, and therefore you may take moist wood. So guys, in summary, then the public may cut off branches from moist, attached prickly shrubs, and thorny trees, provided that the growth is not uprooted. Right, okay, so there's a third enactment, and they may gather grasses for animal feed in any place except a field of fenugreek. And the Gemara asks, is this to say that grasses are beneficial for fenugreek when growing along with it? But in contrast, this ruling in the following Mishnah, guys, the Mishnah is in Kalayim chapter 2, verse 5, in case you want to know. In the case of fenugreek that sprouted with various types of grasses, we do not obligate the farmer to uproot the grasses immediately because he will eventually remove them since they will spoil the fenugreek. So we want to see how these conflicting Tanaic views are resolved. So the first thing that you've got to know is that if you look at Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19, that is, as Kevin taught us once before, the prohibition against kilayim. You shall not plant your field with mixed seeds. So basically the grasses and fenugreek growing together qualifies kilayim. So you're once a little surprised because the Mishnah doesn't obligate the farmer to uproot the grasses immediately to avoid that violation of maintaining kilayim. Because why? He's going to be forced to uproot them in any near future, because what happens is grasses will spoil the fenugreek. They can't both grow together because they affect the soil nutrition, and it's going to damage the fenugreek. So the fenugreek, we learned what it was. It was basically a legume. It was an annual plant, and it was like an Asiatic herb. It had aromatic seeds that grows in pods, so it was used both to sweeten dishes and as a legume, beans, etc., to give you like that sort of protein and carbohydrate base. So the Mishnah obviously speaks of where you've got a crop of fenugreek, and it's being grown for the seeds, and that will be sown to produce new crops. That's according to Rashi. But it's saying you don't have to have this thing of kilayim, because if the grass is going to damage your fenugreek, you're going to get rid of the grass anyway. So there's no issue as far as that's concerned. So therefore, we don't obligate the farmer to uproot it because it's going to be sorted out. So we basically saying, hang on, there was a contrast in Mishnah. The one Mishnah said that grasses damage the progress of fenugreek, and the other Mishnah we learned, Gavin, says that grasses actually enhance the growth of fenugreek. So how do we reconcile the two differences, or in what case does it not damage? So the Gemara answers, Rav Yirmiyah said it's not difficult. Here in the Mishnah, the fenugreek is being grown for seed. In other words, you're using the seeds for flavor, and you're using those seeds to plant somewhere else. And only when those seeds grow somewhere else are you going to have a problem with competition on soil nutrition, but not when it's in its seed stage. But here in our brisa, it's being grown for stalks which are edible and will be eaten. So grasses are harmful to fenugreek when it's grown for seed. In other words, in the initial stage, because it's going to strangle the development of the seed, because they're going to weaken it. So it will sap the strength of the fenugreek seeds. So the seeds don't sprout well when they're sown. But once it's already developed past that stage, should grass grow, it's not going to inhibit the stalks, which are also edible, because at that stage the plant itself of fenugreek has already gained enough momentum and strength to carry on growing without being damaged due to a variant in soil nutrition. So we found that they're beneficial for fenugreek, the grass, when it's grown for the consumption of its stalks. Because when the fenugreek plants stand among the grasses, they rest upon the grasses. So what are we actually talking about here? Is that eventually when the tree is independent enough not to be super sensitive with regards to the ammonia and the soil nutrition and the pH balance, it's going to need the grass, because you can actually create like trellises. Like in the vineyard, what you have is, I don't know, like Jeff Kaplan used to grow granadillas, okay? And he used to grow strawberries and certain other things. Now it's a vine. So anything like a grape, Gavin, what you do is you create a fence. Jeff would create a fence of wood. And then what happens is the granadillas, the vine would grow around there. Are you with me? So if anything, that actually aided the plant's growth. but that's already at the stage of development. But when it's not at that stage of development, you've got a bit of a problem because the seeds are hypersensitive. I think you could compare it to when a fetus gets itself a little bit cut, that it grows up with a scar because that initial development of the fetus has far more of an impact if you do a millimeter of damage than on a full-grown adult that recovers well. Kevin's going to ask something. Kevin, are you okay?
Damon, if the fenugreek gets damaged, will it cost a lot to repair?
Very funny.
You get my joke.
I did get your joke. I get your joke. I have no words. Okay, so all right, guys. The Gemara offers this an alternative explanation.
So you're saying, Damon, just going back to what you said about the vine, if it's been damaged or let's say an incision is made in the fetus or before it's fully developed, it can affect the crop. Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying as follows: is that you can compare seedlings to a human fetus, in that when any operation is needed to a fetus, they do micro incisions. Like, for example, if you go to a maxillofacial that takes off a skull, you have that sort of microscopic surgical work for a fetus. Because any slight scar, I remember at 3 months old, I had a liver biopsy, and that scar has grown along with me because of the fact that it had such an impact on my physiology. So what happens is that once fenugreeks develop from seeds into stalks, etc., it's not as sensitive to the depletion of nutrition in the soil. So therefore it can grow alongside grass once it's reached a certain stage of independence of fenugreek, but not in its initial stage of vulnerability. So it's saying that grass at that stage of the seedling will constrict and sap the nutritional base of the soil. But once the grass comes after fenugreek has developed, it's going to have no negative impact on the fenugreek. In fact, it might even aid it, because when tough grasses come out of wood, you can use it to bind the fenugreek, which is like a legume that grows like granadilla, and you can use it to create almost a trestle upon which the fenugreek can lean. So that was the first explanation. Now, the second explanation by the Gemara is a little bit different, because it says that there's two different types of fenugreek. The one is grown for man to eat. In other words, the more nutrients and water plants are able to draw from the soil, the more superior their produce will be for human consumption. So when grass grows alongside the plants, it siphons some of the soil's essential minerals and pH balance, and it spoils the edible plant, and so the farmer will ultimately uproot the grass. So you don't have to have this prohibition against killing, because the farmer's not going to want to kill his produce. He's going to fix it up himself. We just give him time to do it, because it's self-motivating. If it doesn't, it's going to kill his fenugreek crops. But in the Brisa, it's talking about when fenugreek is grown for animals. And since it's for animal feed, the farmer planted the fenugreek. He wants to have the grasses as well, for the simple reason is that Joshua prohibited the gathering of grasses in other people's fenugreek fields, because grass is good for fenugreek that's being grown for animal food. The bottom line is, firstly, the quality of food that you would eat is different to the quality of food your animal will eat. We've got sensitive palates, we've got sensitive stomachs. Cows have got 4 different digestive systems within there because they chew their cud. They can take grass and consume them, and fenugreek can consume them. So we're not worried to the same degree when it's part of animal fodder. But human consumption requires a much more qualitative product than it does for animal consumption. So the Gemara asks, and from where do we know that a farmer sowed a crop of fenugreek for human consumption, which would allow the public to gather grass from his field under the general condition stipulated by Joshua? So what the Gemara is saying is, okay, so if you're about to take grass from your fellow's field, grass, by the way, how do you know you can take it? In other words, how do you know that you're going to help him? Because you have to remove the grass, because it's going to aid his fenugreek in terms of human consumption? Or how do you know that he doesn't need the grass to feed his own animals? In other words, how do you know the thought process behind the farmer before you start taking some action to damage him? So the Gemara answers, Rav Papa said, if he arranged it as garden beds, in other words, he sowed the fenugreek for man to eat. If it's looking like a structured order, then that's fenugreek fit for man. And then you can take the grass, because the fenugreek, the grass is going to actually damage the fenugreek for man's consumption. But if the fenugreek was not arranged into garden beds, it means he sowed the crop for animals to eat, because you can basically grow it without sort of stipulated and demarcated areas, because the qualitative difference means you're not going to take that amount of effort. So again, Gavin, this isn't in contradiction to taking from your neighbour's grass, because Gavin asked a great question the other day. What's the difference if you pull the grass from your neighbour's place compared to letting your animals graze the grass from your neighbour's place? Which I thought was spot on. So the bottom line is, you've got to firstly know why the grass is there. In other words, if the owner hasn't had a chance to pull it out, and it's going to damage the fenugreek, you're doing him a service by pulling out the grass. But if he has not arranged the fenugreek in proper garden beds, you must know that the grass is going to age, because that fenugreek is growing wild in order to feed his animals, as well as the grass to feed his own animals. You can't touch it then. And secondly, Gavin, to answer your question from the other day, I thought about it, is that when you pull off grass, you're obviously going to speak to the owner before you do something vicious, because you don't want to have a bad relationship with your neighbors. But secondly, more discerning pulling grass away from fenugreek. When your animals come and consume, they would eat fenugreek the same as they'd eat grass. And therefore, you can't allow your animals to do it, because they won't discern from fenugreek from the grass. Even if it's for human consumption, the fenugreek, it would eat the fenugreek, and the grass that it would remove, even if it's beneficial for the fenugreek, your animal won't discern, whereas a human being can, in terms of how to separate. Does that answer your question, Gav?
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
All right, so it was a good question. So one has to be super careful, as Gavin said. So the fourth condition is, and they may cut in any place for grafting or replanting purposes, except for the 2 fistfuls of stump of an olive tree. So let me just say to you what we're saying here is that many plants, like I remember when I wanted to grow rosemary, I took it from an existing rosemary plant. It's the same thing with lavender, etc. And you cut off a stalk and you grow it separately, and it will graft itself and regenerate. But you cannot do it if there is a case where you're going to damage the existing tree or plant, because it's at that stage where it's already been pruned. So, for example, what's this 2 fistfuls of stump of an olive tree? So, if you go through it, there's a commentary by Rav Tanchum and Rav Bilyas, and they explained in the name of a certain elder. Who's that elder? Yeshua ben Levi. In the case of an ordinary olive tree, when cutting off a shoot, one must leave an egg-sized portion of it protruding from a tree. Why? Because the distance from the point of severance to the tree trunk must be at least equal to the height of an egg, so that the shoot will regenerate. In other words, you don't want to retard the future growth of the tree. You want to let it basically recover. But in the case of reeds and vines, one is permitted only to cut from the knot and above. There's a knot, like, I don't know if you know what a knot is. If you cut off bamboo, the bamboo grass grows, and then there's almost a node or knot, and then it grows again. So you have to cut it from that point above so it can regenerate, and not from a crucial point which is going to kill any future development. And with regards to all other trees, one may take from the tree's fruits and not from the tree's central part. So what do we mean? Is you can take from the soft and thin branches, but not from the main part of the tree. In other words, not from its thick and large branches, which are like complete trees in themselves. That's what Rashi says. Okay. So furthermore, one may cut off from a new shoot which has grown during the past year in length and thickness, and therefore does not produce fruit, and not from an old shoot which does produce fruit. So in other words, anything that's going to damage your fellow man, where he's going to lose fruit out of it, or the tree's not going to be able to regenerate, you're not allowed to take. Only the new soft and thinner branches which can regenerate without affecting his current produce. Now, this thing that we talked about, 2 fistfuls from an olive branch, is that proves that the tree was pruned. So you can't damage a tree that's already been pruned, because there's going to be permanent damage. Okay. Furthermore, one may cut from a new shoot which has grown during the past year in length and thickness, and therefore does not produce fruit, as we said, and not from an old shoot which does produce fruit. And even with regard to cutting off from new shoots, this is permitted from a place of a tree that does not see the sun. Okay, so guys, what we're saying there is, if you take shoots that are located within the dense middle part of the tree, and they receive little to no sunlight, according to the Meiri, those shoots are not going to produce many fruits in any event. So you might as well use the DNA of that shoot to basically regenerate a new plant, because due to the lack of sun exposure, it's not going to yield much either. So even those sort of factors have to be taken into account. So you can't take it from a place in the tree that does see the sun. In inverted commas, it means so around the exposed sides of the tree that do receive sunlight. So that's the main producing part of the tree, because the sun causes a fruit to ripen and then it becomes sweet. So obviously, Rashi and Meiri have got a slightly different interpretation. But guys, I'm also bringing in another aspect myself, and that is, you can't affect the plant's ability to photosynthesize. Because what happens is the plant itself creates carbohydrates from the sun. And it obviously creates, that's where you get fructose from, is that fruit sugar develops from photosynthesis originally. So you don't want to take the leaves, etc., that have got a lot of chloroform and attract the sunlight and convert it to energy. You want to take from those leaves that are not going to be involved with the photosynthesis process. So that's why it's talking about the bounty of the sun's crops. So now there's a fifth enactment, and it says the townspeople may be supplied from a spring that had newly issued water from somebody's property. So again, Gavin's question is, but it's from somebody's property. How can you take from a spring that flowed from somebody's property? So basically, the question of compensation is discussed and decided. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna said, and one who draws water from the spring must give money to its owner, but concluded that the Gemara states that the law does not accord with Rabbi Bar Rav Huna. So in other words, the majority of the rabbinical opinion is, if there is a source of water, it's not purely for the owner, which makes sense, because especially if you're in Eretz Israel and you have irrigation problems, especially without this new technology, no one has the right to laugh at the expense of others. Water is a source of life, as long as the original owner is also entitled to it somewhat. Now, Arthur's off camera, but I hope he's still listening. Guys, I know you're all exhausted. I can see you falling asleep. We're almost done. Arthur? Okay, he's there.
So that's good, Damon. This fenugreek, the owner of the land might want to use it himself, because it's actually a type of a food source. Could he use it for feed for his animals, or
well, that's exactly
is it for human consumption?
Well, that's exactly the second opinion of the Gemara, is that if he's using it for animal feed, you've got no right to take the grass, because he needs to feed his animal both from the grass and the fenugreek.
Yeah, so
but if he's using it for human consumption, in that case, the grass is going to damage the quality of the fenugreek, so he would like his grass removed. But before you remove the grass, you would need to ask him. And you can't let your animals remove the grass, because they don't eat with surgical precision. They're going to eat the fenugreek as well as the grass. So you've got to take it. And according to the first opinion, it's different. It's saying that in the seed stage of fenugreek developing, you have to remove the grass. You're doing him a service because it's going to constrict and sap the nutritional value from the soil when the seeds of the fenugreek are most vulnerable. However, when the plant is developed to the degree that it's already developing shoots and stalks, the grass there is not going to damage the fenugreek. If anything, it can use it as trestles to be able to make sure the fenugreek grows upright and can use it almost as a fence to grow around like a vine or a creeper. And those are the two opinions.
So literally, Damon, if the guy wants to take the grass, he must ask the owner. It's literally derech eretz, eh?
Yeah, it's literally derech eretz. Yeah, exactly.
Because it's the land, yeah.
Exactly. But you know what? I think what we're learning here, bottom line, is that if you want to have a good relationship with your neighbors, sometimes I'll tell you what it is. Like, I don't mind if somebody asks me for something, and 99% of the chance I'll say yes. I don't want somebody to just take it for granted. Nobody likes to be taken for granted. I think, you know what I mean? There's just a derech eretz. If you're staying over at a friend, you might 9 times out of 10 say, listen, in the middle of the night, you get hungry, help yourself. But you don't go there in the middle of the night and start raiding his fridge. You could say to him, listen, my blood sugar gets a little low during the night. Would you mind if I grab something to eat if my blood sugar drops? And 9 times out of 10, person will say yes. But if the oak wakes up in the middle of the night and you're opening up his fridge and you're snacking, there's a little bit of a chutzpah if you haven't spoken. Now, it's not that the person would not allow you to. It's just a common consensual level of respect. You know what I'm saying? So that's all it's about, is creating a fair sort of system. We've got 10 minutes left, then we're done. So the 6th enactment is that, because we already discussed in the 5th enactment that you can't deprive the people of Eretz Yisrael of water if you've got a spring within your private property. Although you can't deprive the original owner either, so it's got to be shared because water is a source of life. So there's a 6th enactment, and all Jews may fish with a hook and a line in the Sea of Tiberias, which is the Sea of Reeds, the Kinneret, and even
Sea of Galilee.
Sorry, the Sea of Galilee, not the Sea of Reeds. I don't know what I'm thinking of. The Kinneret is the Sea of Galilee. That's exactly right. So it's the Sea of Tiberias. So guys, you can use a fish and a hook and a line, but it lies entirely in the portion of Naphtali. So even though it lies in Naphtali's portion, Naphtali is not the only one exclusively allowed to do it. But you can't spread out an enclosure and a net, because if you detain too many fish, you're going to kill the fish resource, damage the boats, and it has to be constrained that you can only basically fish for your meal, but certainly not on a commercial basis. Although the tribe of Naphtali were allowed certain privileges of using nets, not according to all sources, but according to Rabbeinu Peretz. Some of the other sources say there was still a restriction there that they couldn't also deplete the fish. So, just a couple of other things. The Gemara describes an agreement that was made before Joshua's enactment. The rabbis taught in a brisa, in the beginning, the tribes of Israel stipulated amongst themselves that no one, not even the owner of the portion, shall spread out an enclosure in the Sea of Tiberias and detain the boats, but that it could ensnare fish with various types of nets. Subsequently, Joshua decreed that all tribes could fish only with a hook and a line in the sea. Okay? So accordingly, when the brisa stated, providing that one does not spread out the enclosure and detain the boats, it said it incidentally because the main part was not to kill the future fishing potential. Obviously, you can't damage boats. So the Gemara discusses Naphtali's ownership of the sea in Tiberias and said that they were also entitled to use the land in order to bring the fish across, whereas the others had to use boats and they couldn't relax on Naphtali's portion of the land to draw in the fish. So the rabbis taught in a brisa the Sea of Tiberias was located entirely in the portion of Naphtali, And not only that, but the tribe took in inheritance a fishnet rope length of land on the sea's south shore, so that it could pull in nets. And this was to fulfill that which was stated in Moshe's commandment to Naphtali, go possess the sea and its south shore. So in Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 23, it's saying that they could also use the, the beach side if they needed to. What were you going to ask, Kev?
And so in this week's parsha, I say, all the land is allocated to the different tribes.
It's exactly in this parsha. It's exactly in this parsha.
At the end of Bamidbar.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So let's just cover a little bit more. We've got 6 minutes and we're done. I can see you all guys finished. You've done 10 rounds in the boxing match where it's nearly a KO. All right. Another teaching about the division of Eretz Yisrael. It was taught in a brisa by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who said, all trees detached from the soil that were found in the mountains of Eretz Yisrael stand in possession of all the tribes in Israel. So guys, the minute it actually was attached, then it belongs to that particular tribe whose area it was attached. But if there are things that detach from the soil, they then belong to all the tribes. Okay? And the tree is still attached to the soil in the possession of that tribe that inherited the land where they grow. And you do not have a single tribe from the nation of Israel that does not have a portion in the mountains, lowlands, open countries, and valleys of Eretz Yisrael. So what it's saying is that you've basically, it was distributed fairly, that all the resources were open to every tribe, so the way the partitions were made. And it was stated in Deuteronomy, Devarim chapter 1, verse 7, in which God orders the Yisrael to begin their journey to Eretz Yisrael after the nearly long encampment of Har Sinai. Okay? So what it's saying is that it's saying to turn yourselves around and journey and come to the mountain of the Amorite and to all its neighbors, in the plain, on the mountain, in the lowland, and in the open country, and to the sea coast. Obviously, not everybody, I think, got the sea coast. Now, Scripture here reveals that the land of the Amorites have all these features, and so you find with regards to the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Amorites before them, and it's stated in that verse, and to all its neighbors from the equating of the neighboring nations of Canaan with the Amorite nation, we see that its neighbors were also thus endowed with mountains and lowlands, open countries and valleys, and the 12 tribes of Israel subsequently conquered all this land from the Canaanite nations. Okay, so obviously, since the land of Canaan, look, it all had the same topographical variety. So no matter which tribe got what land, it was really fairly even in terms of the fact that each one had mountains, lowlands, open countries, valleys. I don't think as much in terms of the ocean. I think that was reserved for certain tribes like Naphtali, etc. But that's fairly a novel point. Now, guys, I think we're going to end off on this note. We on nearly finished the 81st daf. We actually covered a lot of ground tonight. I hope you are happy with me.
Shkach, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
well done.
I must just check. But Damon,
Yeah?
but my phone, it worked. Zoom worked when just before I caught the bus. So why didn't it work afterwards?
Because I think
the audio.
I think when you're traveling at that speed and everybody's using